New Star Wars movies have been out of the theatres since 2019 and fans have been eagerly anticipating their return. Strap yourselves in guys, because Lucasfilm CEO Kathleen Kennedy has just changed the plan for the theatrical releases yet again.
Things have changed.
But there's a huge chance this will backfire.
You failed, Your Highness.
We'll start by taking a look at what she said, if this will likely affect the movies already announced, and how this can all go horribly wrong. Now, in recent years, Star Wars has solely been on Disney Plus in shows like The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett and Andor, and the last theatrical release was met with mixed reviews. Star Wars in the theatres has been declining ever since The Last Jedi. And although the sequel trilogy still generated a lot of money, the solo film didn't, and that played into Lucasfilm's hesitation when it come to releasing movies after that. But regardless on where you sit with Disney's Star Wars, it's actually nothing new. You see, George Lucas had the same problem with the prequel trilogy. The OT fans didn't appreciate the style and the tone of the prequels. But after what would be a 6-year hiatus from the theatres, they are set to return in 2025 with a movie focusing on the new Jedi Order 15 years after the rise of Skywalker, and Daisy Ridley was set to return as Rey. And to follow on from that, it's reported that Dave Filoni's Mandoverse movie would be released the following year in 2026, and then in 2028 was meant to be the James Mangold movie following the Dawn of the Force, The First Jedi. Now this is a complete departure from not having a movie for 6 years. We're now looking at getting 3 movies in 4 years, and on top of that there's also talk of Taika Waititi filming his Star Wars movie in 2024, and that would likely fit into a 2027 slot, so we could be looking at 4 movies in the space of 4 years, which would be a return to the release schedule of old when Disney first took over Lucasfilm. And a lot of this was announced at the recent Star Wars celebration in London, but this whole strategy looks to be changing again just weeks after these movies were announced. And that's all within a new Empire Online article promoting their next edition that's just about to drop. They've got a whole section of Star Wars, and they've got different interviews with different actors and different members within Lucasfilm. And they've released a snippet of their interview with Kathleen Kennedy. Now, to summarise what the article just says, it reinforces what we just spoke about, with Kathleen Kennedy recently confirming plans for 3 new films at Star Wars Celebration, with the Force ready to awaken on the big screen once more. But then the article goes on to say that it's now a question of when those upcoming movies are expected to arrive, and as Kennedy tells Empire, that's simply a case of when they're ready, even though they have kind of committed to dates, and they've had these dates set for Star Wars movies for a few years now. They just didn't know which movies were going to fill them. Kathleen Kennedy, interestingly, has referenced James Bond. Now this is very, very strange. She goes on to say, "I've often brought up Bond," Kennedy tells us at Star Wars Celebration. "That's every 3 or 4 years, and there wasn't this pressure to feel like it had to have a movie every year. I feel like that was very important to Star Wars. We have to eventize this. The simple answer is nothing is likely to hit the multiplexes until at least 2025. It's much better to tell the truth." She goes on to say that we're going to make these movies when they're ready to be made and release them when they're ready to be released. Now for me, this is absolutely crazy. Star Wars shouldn't be scrambling around looking at how other franchises operate. They are big enough at this point. They should be able to set the benchmark that other franchises aspire to, but this simply isn't the case. Star Wars isn't James Bond, and it isn't Marvel. Star Wars should be eventized, but they can still do that and not leave a gap of 4 years. 3 years at absolute maximum. Star Wars is the type of event that people even now, even when interest in Star Wars has waned, still mark it off on their calendar as the date of Star Wars movies coming out. When George Lucas had Star Wars, and this is a complete different story as to why Kathleen Kennedy didn't reference what Star Wars used to be like, she now references James Bond. George Lucas, when he had Star Wars between trilogies, he released a movie every 3 years. 1977 was A New Hope, 1980 Empire Strikes Back, 1983 Return of the Jedi, 1999 for the prequels, The Phantom Menace, 2002 Attack of the Clones, and to wrap it all up for 2005's Revenge of the Sith. 3 years in between movies does clearly work. It's been tried and tested, and it is a proven way to keep interest in Star Wars and to keep it relevant and to keep interest high. A Star Wars movie every December when Disney first released them, when they released The Force Awakens, and then they released Rogue One, and then they released The Last Jedi, they all pulled in big numbers. And the first 2 movies were really well received. So what that should tell the people in charge over at Lucasfilm is they can release a movie every year, providing it's a good movie. They don't have to pin their hopes once every 4 years for a movie, because then they also run the problem of, if they do put out another film that is devices like The Last Jedi, they're not going to put out another film after that for 4 years. And there already has been brand damage caused by the sequels, particularly with Episode 8. Now, this isn't strictly a Disney problem, of course. It also happened with the prequel trilogy with George Lucas. Fans of the original trilogy didn't appreciate the style, the CGI, and the story that George was telling in the prequel trilogy. Kind of like fans from the prequel trilogy don't generally like the sequel trilogy all that much. But let's say Disney, when they first took over Star Wars, if they announced the first movie was going to be a movie set between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, two of the movies that are usually quite far down in people's rankings, the numbers would have been significantly lower than what they were for The Force Awakens. A lot of fans who grew up with the original trilogy wouldn't necessarily rush to the theatre to check it out. Star Wars fans as a whole are a very difficult bunch to please. What 50% of the fans like, the rest don't, it seems. It's not impossible though. If they kept the same style they did with the sequels rather than being too CGI heavy, because the visuals in the sequels did please all the fans, there wasn't really any complaints about that, but they enhanced it with a more prepared and more worked out story, and they treated the characters, if they are going to use legacy characters, if they did treat them appropriately, then they could win over the masses, and a movie each year would then work and it would make them a lot of money, because Star Wars, as I say, is that brand, it is that franchise that you mark your date on the calendar for the end of the year and you look forward to it, and when you go, you make a big event of it. You sometimes go to the midnight viewing, you spend a little bit more on popcorn than you normally would, you get a larger drink, you get all comfortable, some people dress up outside the cinema. You don't get that for many movies. The bottom line is, it could be a recipe for disaster. If Star Wars continue to put out films that do divide the fans, that do cause a lot of division, and then they only release them once every 4 years, so it's not like they can come back the next year with an absolute banger and correct themselves and put them back on a steady path, it's a recipe for disaster. Could you imagine a movie that divides the fandom like The Last Jedi and then being left to sit on it for 4 years? But then there's the big question of, how is this going to affect all these movies they've just announced? And at the moment it isn't too clear. I hope it isn't going to affect them, and hopefully this is just Kathleen Kennedy talking and it's not something that will see light of day. If this next movie in 2025 does well, they might change their tune a little bit. Or it could be an idea that they want to pick up on after this next load of movies. But of course, before these movies are actually released, they need to be completed. And a lot of fans at the moment have doubts that these movies will ever see the light of day, with the long list of previous projects that never saw the light of day of Lucasfilm and were shelved or delayed indefinitely, and they will never see the light of day. Lucasfilm has a long history of that lately. And these fans that think some of these films, especially the James Mangold film, never seeing light of day as a probability, they could be proven right. Guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Star Wars should be eventized to the degree that you only get it once every 4 years? Remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave a like on today's video, I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.